Yeah, you want to? Sure, sure. Oh, perfect. Oh, okay, great.
Okay.
I'll just wait on the sidelines.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome all of you who are here and all of you who are watching from home. My name is Susan Melstein. I'm chair of the Adult Education Committee here at Congregation Beth Israel. And our focus this year has been on our languages, on Ladino and on Yiddish. And we started out the year with a professor from, I think I touched something.
You did, but that's okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay, there we go. We started out with Professor Devin Nahr from the University of Washington's Sephardic Studies program. We hosted Avi Hoffman, who's a Yiddish entertainer. And today we're going to learn about the Yiddish Book Center. So I want to say that I'm very grateful to Ira Wagner, who is a member of our congregation and the Adult Education Committee, and he's the one who made the connection with our speaker today, Susan Bronson. So I'm going to have Ira come up and introduce Susan. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and everybody else up there on the camera. So I'm relatively new to Portland. I've been here a couple of years. I joined CBI. I went on the Adult Education Committee, and I've been involved with the Book Center for about 20 years. I've been a member. I started off as being a member, and then Susan discovered me about 12 years ago and came to visit, and I got more involved. I went on the board about 10 years ago, and this is my 5th year as the chair of the board of the Book Center. So it's a wonderful organization, a wonderful institution, and actually the Book Center has 110 members in the state of Oregon, and some of them are in the room here today. So, so they have, it's a wonderful place to be associated with. I'm sure you're going to enjoy Susan very much today and her presentation, and thank you all for being here.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I want to thank Ira and Kim for hosting me here, and I want to thank the congregation for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. Those of you who are members, I know there are a few of you, thank you for that, and have forbearance because I'm going to be going over some things you already know, but you can help me convince all the others that they need to be part of this amazing organization that I am so proud to be part of. So I'm going to start by showing you a film which gives you a little bit of history of the center and introduces you to our founder, Aaron Lansky, as a way of just by background. And then I'm going to talk about everything that we're doing now and why it matters. So give me a second, and we're going to load up this film. It may take a minute. It's called Bridge of Books. Whoops. Is this, hold on a minute. Build remaining. Okay, let's see if this is going to start. There we go. It's called Bridge of Books, and it greets our visitors when they come to the center. It's an orientation film that just gives you a feeling for the history of the organization and how we got started. I guess it's on the internet, so just give it a moment. We tested it out. It does work. There we go. Okay.
Yiddish was a spoken language of roughly 3/4 of the world's Jews for the past 1,000 years. Books were our portable homeland. Books define our national identity. We call ourselves Am HaSefer, the people of the book. And yet here were books being destroyed. When I first came up with this idea to go rescue the world's Yiddish books, the response everywhere was essentially the same. Don't you know Yiddish is dead? Don't you know no one cares about this culture any longer? Why don't we give you a nice scholarship and you can go off and study in Israel? What do you have to waste your time with these old books that nobody wants? they said that, well, all of Yiddish literature was out of print. If you wanted to find an out-of-print Yiddish book, you could go to an obscure book dealer in Amsterdam, or else you might find it in a garbage can in Brooklyn, and there wasn't too much in between. First of all, you have to understand, I was 23 years old when all this came about. I was studying Yiddish literature. Probably would have gone on to a very conventional academic career were it not for this one very basic problem. There were no books to read. Each week our professor would assign us, I don't know, a novel by any of dozens of major Yiddish writers. So right after class, one of us would race off and be the first one to get to the Jewish Public Library and find a copy of the book. But for the rest of us, there were no books to be had. So I started putting up notices, little signs of the Jewish delicatessen and the laundromat in the old Jewish neighborhood saying, I'm a young graduate student, I'm looking for Yiddish books. So before I knew it, people were calling up. Boxes of books are piled high, and my apartment is overflowing with piles and piles and piles of Yiddish books. And it was somewhere along that point, I got a phone call from my parents, and they said, Aaron, I think you have to come home because the rabbi's given us so many books, we're afraid the second story of the house is about to collapse. And I think it was just about that moment that the Yiddish Book Center was born. Well, I had no clue what the actual work of going around and collecting Yiddish books really entailed. Along with all these boxes of books came letters and postcards from older Jews who would write and say, I have many books to give you, but I'm too old, or I'm too infirm, or there are just too many books. You're going to have to come and get them. So in mid-July of 1980, I set out on my very first collection trip. I'd received a postcard which came from an elderly man, and I knew already how old he was because it was a penny postcard which came postage due. So he writes in this very scratchy handwriting, said, I'm a very old man, I am leaving on a trip to Israel, I'm afraid that I might not return, and if I don't, I'm afraid they will throw away my books, will you please help me? I show up at noon, and in this tiny one-room apartment, all there was a little small bed. There was a metal table with a hot plate and 1 million bottles of medicine. And other than that, the apartment was full of boxes and piles of both Yiddish and Hebrew books. Well, I figured, all right, you take the books, you put them in the hand truck, you roll them out to the truck, Fartik, and you move on to the next stop. It wasn't to be. He sat me down at the table, he says, oh, no, he says, Junger man, young man, which became sort of my generic name in the Yiddish world. He says, Junger man, he says, I first have to tell you about each of these books. He began handing me every one of these books, one volume at a time. He says, this book here, my wife and I, we bought in 1927. We went without lunch for a week. We should be able to afford it. And this book, have you read this book? Sit down right now, look at this book. It went on for hours and hours and hours. I'm so far behind schedule. At this point, I finally have his books in the truck. I'm about to drive off, and he says, "En minut, junger man," he says, "Wohin läufst du? Where are you running to?" I said, "Where am I running?" I said, "I have other stops to make. I'm already behind schedule." He says, "Oh," he says, "Ihr versteht nicht, you don't understand," he said. And he explained that when he received my telegram, he told all the other people in the building that I was coming. He said, "They all have books for you. Let's get to work." It's like this 12-story high-rise building. I said, "All the people have books." That's right, they all have books. Let's start going. We walked into the building. He knocks on every door. People come out with shopping bags and boxes, suitcases even full of books for me. And of course, what do you think you have to do at every single apartment? They bring you inside. They sit you down at the table. They make a glass of tea. They take the intimate cakes come out of the box, and the luxury kiddush that have been waiting all day come out of the oven. And they feed me, and they tell me the story of their books as well. Here I am, 23 years old, in jeans and a t-shirt, but somehow it's fallen on me to try to pick up the fragments of this world and save them for the future. Because when people give you their books, it's a very candid moment in their lives. They're handing you the treasures they've accumulated in their lifetime, and they know their own children and their own grandchildren don't. invariably they're crying. They tell stories with a candor that would probably be very rare in their lives. So it's a very special moment. There was a sort of emotional understanding that when people hand you their books, as they say to you, Junger Mann, ot is mein Yerusha, here is my inheritance, this is what I am leaving to the world. What they're leaving to you is a world that is very fast vanishing. It was a world that was shattered in the Holocaust. It was a world that simply vanished under the pressures of assimilation. These were the people who themselves had created a new world. And it was a new world in which very few people were now interested. And so here we were. They had so much to tell us. There was a sort of understanding that what was happening was a moment in history. I mean, I knew that from the very first trip, and I never forgot that, and I have not forgotten it 21 years later. Early on, it became apparent there was no way that a handful of young people were going to be able to, round up thousands of what turned out to be hundreds of thousands of Yiddish books. So we organized a network of what we call Sammlers, volunteer book collectors. The idea went way back to the early years of the 20th century, when Jewish historians of Eastern Europe had called for a network of these Sammlers, or volunteer collectors, to round up communal records. It's been an enormously emotional experience for us, our encounters with the Sammlers over the years. For them, it was cultural preservation. It was saving their own lives and their own life stories. They had a real urgency in what they were doing. I think the real question, though, is how come so many people care about dusty old Yiddish books they can't read in the first place? When my mother's mother came to America, she was carrying with her a valise in which she had everything she had brought with her from the old country. Her older brother met her and took the suitcase, and he flung it overboard. Her photographs of her parents, her clothing, her Shabbos candlesticks, everything she had with her was thrown out. He understood that the price of admission to America was to throw the old country away. But I think for my generation, I am finally secure enough in my Americanism that I can now go back and I can dredge the harbor and I can find the suitcase that was thrown out. In the beginning, I was literally hitchhiking from city to city. Every time I would speak, 5 people, 10 people, 15 people would sign up as members. So that today the book center is supported by over 30,000 members. We're one of the largest Jewish cultural organizations in the country. We have this wonderful building. It gives to Yiddish what we call in Yiddish an adres, which in Yiddish means a little more than an address. It means it gives it a place in the world. I will never forget when I stood there that first night after we finally moved into the building. Yiddish had finally found a home. But the next challenge was, how do you interpret that literature for the 99% of the visitors who can't read those books in the original? So we organize educational programs. We're doing exhibitions. And of course we have the core of books. We've augmented or established collections of Yiddish literature at 450 major university and research libraries in 26 countries around the world. And then in the summertime, we have groups of student interns who come. We teach them Yiddish in the morning, and they spend the rest of their day going through these physical preservation of the literature, we have a much bigger work. Today the challenge is how do you open up the books and share the culture with a broader world? And for that, the work's just begun.
So that film was made 23, 24 years ago, but we still show it because I think it is so, whoops, how do I stop it? There we go. Okay, moving along. I still like to show it because I think it so eloquently captures the story of the Yiddish Book Center. It captures Aaron's story in a way that I certainly couldn't, and I think it sort of captures the ethos of the Yiddish Book Center. So now, as Aaron said, you know, the challenge is how do we open up the books, metaphorically and literally, to new generations? As you enter the center, you'll see a quote on the wall. Yiddish has magic, it will outwit history. Aaron wrote a memoir about his experience collecting the book called Outwitting History. The quote comes from Max Weinreich, who was a famous linguist and the driving force behind YIVO, the great Yiddish research institute based in New York. It was originally based in Vilna, it's now in New York. And I think the quote captures the magic of Yiddish and all the Yiddish Book Center represents. And I'll give you a sense of the range of our activities. So Aaron talked a lot about the books, rescuing the books. We could never have imagined that 44 years later the books would still be pouring in. We've rescued about 1.5 million books to date. They still come in. They come in every week in boxes, in crates. During the pandemic, we rescued more books than the previous 10 years. I think mostly because people were cleaning out their basements and so forth and so on. You know, when we were closed to the public, people would pull up in their cars and they'd have boxes of books for us, and we couldn't let them in the building, but we took their books. Recently, a tractor trailer came with a huge crate. It was so big that our fellows who are with us for the year had to actually climb inside to empty it. And every time there are titles we hadn't seen before. I mean, you would think we'd seen all the titles. We've been doing this for 45 years, but no, I mean, the books come from all over the world, and because they come from all over the world, there were publishing centers in South America, in Mexico City, in Australia, and we're always finding new treasures. A book that recently came in was a translation of Dickens, a very rare translation of Dickens into Yiddish. We get art books. We recently got a treatise on the influence of Arabic on Yiddish speakers in Jerusalem in the 1920s and 1930s. I mean, it's endless. And our fellows who are with us and who are unpacking these books, I mean, it's an adventure every time a box comes in. So that's, of course, very exciting. But it was never just our goal to collect the books and put them in the basement and lock them away and preserve them. Of course, the preservation is important, and we value that. But we were also pioneers in book digitization. About 25 years ago, we started scanning and digitizing the books. We put them all online with the support of Steven Spielberg's Righteous Purses Funds. We created the Spielberg Digital Yiddish Library with more than almost 12,000 titles, and they're all available online for free. So here you can see some of the book discovery going on. That's our repository downstairs, and this was during the pandemic. We had so many books coming in, we spread them out in our big performance hall, and when it was safe to come back in the building, we started going through them. So it's just always very exciting. And the Digital Yiddish Library, you can go to our website, you can search the books, they're all searchable. We recently created optical character recognition for Yiddish, which means you can type in a phrase, a word, a place name, and it will search immediately millions of pages of Yiddish books and show you exactly where in that book. Right. So it's just an incredible thing for scholars, for researchers, for anyone who knows Yiddish who wants to find something. I mean, I did my dissertation. I spent hours going through microfilm and microfilm. This is just revolutionary. What's also really exciting is that we're partnering with the National Library of Israel, with YIVO, and with the New York Public Library to create what we're calling the Universal Yiddish Library. So we have 12,000 titles digitized. If you went to collect books from American homes, you would get a lot of bestsellers, right? You get thousands of copies of, I don't know, Danielle Steele. Well, we get a lot of collected works of Sholem Aleichem. We get a lot of the most popular titles, but there are many other books out there that we don't have. National Library of Israel, YIVO, and New York Public have the other largest collections of Yiddish titles. We think there are about 60,000 total Yiddish titles. So we are working with them to create a single portal for all of Yiddish literature. So you won't have to go to these different places to find it. It will all be in one place, and it will all be fully searchable. So the Universal Yiddish Library actually been working on it for about 8 years now, and it's going to go live in beta next December. So really exciting. Yiddish, which was being thrown away, dumpsters, is now going to be the world's first fully digitized literature, which is just a phenomenal achievement. But who's reading the books? And this is a question we get asked. These are books in Yiddish. Well, we don't exactly know because we don't track the usage. It's an open site. You can just go on, you can download them, you can do whatever you want. But we do know, obviously, scholars, students, young people who are learning Yiddish, older readers, people who have Yiddish reading groups around the country. And we've also learned through the grapevine that Hasidic community, people in the Hasidic community are actually reading these books even though they're treif. It's a secular literature, it's not part of what they're supposed to be doing, but we do know that people in that community are also reading these books. What's really phenomenal is that since we digitized the books, they've been downloaded more than 5 million times. So it's really an incredible thing. But we also know that many people are never going to learn Yiddish, and it's not our goal to teach everyone Yiddish. So we decided we needed to do something about that. We needed to think about translating the books. About a decade ago, 12 years ago, we had a conference. We brought together scholars. We said, what do we need to do to make sure that we can begin to translate some of these books? Only about 2% of Yiddish literature has been translated. 60,000 titles, 2%. So that's a lot of books to translate. So one thing that came out of that conference is we set up a translation fellowship to start training a new generation of translators. And we have since trained about 100 translators and more. Every year we bring in about 8 to 10 people. They don't spend the year with us. They don't give up their day jobs. They do this on the side, whether they're students or scholars, or we have a professor from Johns Hopkins Medical School who's translating Yiddish books. But it's been phenomenal, and they are all translating books and publishing. But publishing is also challenging. So we decided we needed to set up a publishing initiative. So we created what we call White Goat Press, which is our own publishing imprint. And over the last few years, we've begun publishing new Yiddish literature in translation. And I'm going to highlight just a few for you so you get a sense of what we're doing. The first you see on the far right, Isaac Bashevis Singer, Writings on Yiddish and Yiddishkeit, the War Years, 1939 to 1945. Now, Bashevis Singer is probably one of the few Yiddish writers, other than Sholem Aleichem, that most people know about. They know his name. But they don't know that he wrote essays under a pseudonym for the Yiddish Forward. And we're translating those essays, or David Stromberg, a scholar from Israel, is translating these essays. This is the first of 3 volumes. This particular volume, he's writing during a time, during the war, he's struggling with what is going to happen to Yiddish, what is going to happen to the Jewish people, and these essays are incredibly poignant, and they feel very prescient, and they feel very modern. And it's a small volume, but it's really powerful. The second book on the screen is an autobiographical novel, Dina, by a woman named Ida Maza. She was best known as a poet. For many people thought all women did was write poetry. Well, it turns out that's actually not true. Women wrote many novels, and the older scholars knew a certain canon of Yiddish literature, but they did not know about the works of many of these women writers. And with the books being digitized, a new generation is going in and finding new treasures in the digitized collection. This is an autobiographical novel by Ida Maza about her childhood in Belarusia before her family went to Canada. And she became very well known in the Yiddish-speaking community and had a salon, a literary salon, but no one knew about this book. And one of our translation fellows, Yirmiyahu Aaron Taub, has translated it. It's a lovely book. And the last one is just coming out this spring, and it's one that we're really, really excited about, and I think it's going to be one of the most important books that we put out. It's called Warsaw Testament by Rochel Auerbach and translated by Sam Kassow. Rochel Auerbach was a member of the Oinig Shabbos group in the Warsaw Ghetto. The Oinig Shabbos group was a group of intellectuals, journalists, and writers who decided they had to document their experience at the time. Their work, they buried it in milk cans under the Warsaw Ghetto. You might have heard this story. These milk cans were dug up after the war. She was one of the few people who survived. She went to Israel when these cans were dug up. She retrieved her writings from the time and put them together in 2 volumes in Yiddish about her experience in the Warsaw Ghetto. So these are being translated into 1 volume for the first time, and again, coming out just this spring from White Goat Press. So this is just an example. We've put out about 20 titles to date, many, many more to come, and it's very exciting to see these works coming into the world and finding new readers. And I think coming into classrooms, being used by students and scholars, and it's really rewarding. But we want everyone to read them. We have a book club. You can sign up on our website to become part of the book club. We offer virtual public programs about each book. We send out reader resources so you could gather people in your own community and talk about the books. So that's a wonderful way to engage. And education overall is a key part of our work. So Aaron talked about the students. The summer program that he referred to is sort of our flagship program. We bring about 18 to 20 college students to us every year. They study Yiddish for 7 weeks, and then they used to just open boxes of books. Now they do a lot of programming around learning Yiddish culture and history. And that program is ongoing. But we've also invested in a lot of other educational programming. We decided it was time to publish a new Yiddish textbook. When we hired the director of our Yiddish Language Institute, Asya Weissman-Schulman, about 10 years ago, we said to Asya, we want you to do an online Yiddish course. This was before the pandemic and online Yiddish went crazy. And she said, well, that's a great idea, except we need a new textbook first. We said, fine, how long is that going to take? A year, 2 years? Well, about 8 years later, we finally published. It came out in August of 2020. It was kind of fortuitous when it came out because it came out early in the pandemic. People were home. They were eager to study. They were eager to learn. The textbook is called Inanim. It's a 2-volume beginner Yiddish textbook. I think, Perry, you've used that textbook, I believe. It's really transformational. It's modern. It's contemporary. It's really the first major Yiddish textbook published since 1948. And it kind of brings Yiddish language learning into the modern age and puts it along the ranks of any other foreign language textbook that you would find. So that book has now sold more than 4,000 copies. It's being used at colleges and universities all around the country. And we're continuing to work on developing intermediate language materials, and we're also training Yiddish teachers. I speak English, but I'm not teaching anyone English. And the field of Yiddish language pedagogy was actually way behind the curve because it really wasn't taken seriously. But we're training language teachers so that they can go out in the world and be equipped to teach the language according to modern language pedagogical standards. So that's one part of our education work. I mentioned the college students. We work with high school students. We work with adults. We've done a program for rabbis. We've done a program for Jewish day school teachers. So we're trying to devise various ways to bring Yiddish educational and cultural content into all of these different settings. We've just launched a program of Yiddish arts and culture for Jewish communities where we're inviting all kinds of Jewish communal settings, whether it's a shul, whether it's a hillel, whether it's a museum, to apply to us, to send someone to us for a year-long program. They won't be living with us for a year. They'll be part of a cohort where they learn some content and they get some resources and mentoring so they can bring Yiddish cultural programming to their own communities. Because I think one of the greatest challenges is how do we bring this into Jewish spaces? How do we make this more a part of what we're doing? We're also working with public libraries. We launched a program a couple of years ago to bring librarians to the Yiddish Book Center so they could set up reading groups in their own communities of the very Yiddish books that we're translating. And we do it around a theme. This year's theme is Stories of Exile. So we want to create dialogue with other cultural groups. So by thinking about how Yiddish literature can be in conversation with the literatures of other cultures, I think is really important as we try and just improve people's understanding of this culture and how it fits into our larger conversation. We talked, yesterday I was at the Oregon Jewish Museum. We screened a film, Wer wird bleiben, which was the product of our Wexler Oral History Project. We started a project 13 years ago to collect the stories of native Yiddish speakers and those with deep connections to Yiddish culture. Those stories were just as much at risk of being lost as the books that we have been saving. So we set up this project. Each of the oral histories is 1 to 2 hours long. We've collected about 1,300 to date, and we've collected them from all over the world. From Mexico, we've been to South America, we've been to Australia, we've been to Eastern Europe, and they're in many languages. They're also up on our website, and they're searchable. We've gotten a grant from the NEH, the National Endowment for the Humanities, so you can go in and, just as with the books, you can search for a topic or a name or a theme. It'll take you to the place in the oral history where that is mentioned. So again, an amazing tool for scholars, but also just an incredible thing for anyone who wants to understand more about Yiddish and the Jewish community writ large. So I'm going to share a couple of clips of these so you can get a feel for what they're all about. The first one, I think this is somebody you're going to recognize, right? So we've collected stories of celebrities as well as with ordinary people. Leonard Nimoy grew up in Boston in a Yiddish-speaking home. He was a Yiddish speaker. This particular clip I happen to love because he's reciting a Yiddish poem by Itzik Monger, and in this particular case, we inserted some pictures of the book itself and also Itzik Monger himself reading the poem. So it's just a lovely little clip, and here it comes.
A song that burned itself into my brain, and I just fell in love with the song because I felt so identified with it. A song called Auf dem Weg steht der Boy. It spoke of a boy who says to his mother, there's this tree on the road, and alle Vögel von den Bäumen sind zu zerflogen. All the birds have flown away from the tree. It's like a miserable, like a mother. The Bäume gelost alleen, heftig from a storm. The tree is standing alone, and there's a storm coming. So I said to Mama, I said to my mother, look, Mama, instant say mother Vogel. In a moment, I want to become a bird, and I want to go fly to that tree and sit on its branches and sing to it to keep it company during the winter. And she says,
Itzikroin, nedem Gottes will, nem choć mi tak szaleć zoschło szwakilu, die kaloschen nem der wird jeder scharfer Winter, in die Kischme tider urleien mir in Winter. In dus Winterladen nimmt Jesu die Scheute, und die wissen Jan im Gast zwischen alle Teute.
And then he says, geen de vliegels is me schwer. Zoveel zaken als een ander ongetundde vingeren slagen. I can't fly. My mother put on so many clothes.
Ich gefreue in ihrer Reihe mit der Babes Augen. Es hat ihr Liebschaft nicht gelassen. Wer ihr abheugen.
I'm so identified with it. I got away. But it was tough. It was really tough. I remember my mother crying at the train station when I left. And I was like my grandfather. I was the adventurer, taking off for another world, for all they knew. And to be an actor, no way that was going to work.
I love that clip. So here's another one. Let's see. This is very different. This is a rabbi who lives in Mexico City now. His name is Libela Yinich, and he's singing a song from Moisesville, where he grew up, which was a Jewish agricultural colony in Argentina. And again, I think the incredible beauty of these stories is that they're capturing memories of places that so many of us don't even know existed, and they're doing it in a really deeply personal way. So here's this one. Let's see if I make sure I get this to play. Come on. Hold on. Whoops. Nope, sorry. There we go. This should work.
vielleicht singen, in Moses will man singen, sie mir fängt singen, mein Städte, Moses will. Bist a Yiddische Medine, bist a Stolz in Argentine, Moses will. Setz ich wieder rein in Bahn, Estación La Große, dorten Sehne nicht in neuer Faran, nur Rippen, Glois Gor, Moshe Chai, no Chai Dvoshe, Oya Gwaltinke, Farzei. In Argentinien gibt es eine Sache wieder von der Yiddische Städtlach.
What's also interesting about some of these, I mean, he's a native Yiddish speaker. We use these in teaching as well, because, of course, you can hear the different dialects and you can hear people speaking the language as it was spoken, which is a lot harder to do these days. I mean, it's true in the Hasidic community, of course they speak Yiddish and it is the language of daily life. It's not necessarily the same Yiddish, and it doesn't capture all of those different dialects that existed. So here's one more, and then you'll have to explore the rest on your own by going to our website. Let's see. Sorry, I'm having figured.
Und eine andere Sache, was ich vergessen und vergessen. Und ich hoffe einfach nicht wenig, wenn ich der Mann sagt, kommt es auch zurück. Wenn wir haben gedacht, davor und zu kommen dort zu Amerika, haben wir gedacht, gehen nach Städte und gehen zu einem Platz, wo wir haben eine Bahn, zu gehen als Schiff. Die ganze Stadt hat ausgekommen und sagen, als wir fahren weg, so sagen uns vorbei. Aber mein Papa hat gewählt, aber wir sind nachgelaufen, wir haben gestanden in einem Wagen mit Pferd, keiner hat doch nicht gehabt, kein Automobil. Ich und meine Schwester und mein Mann, wir gestanden in den Wagen und alle seine Tochter gewählt, mit geklappt und gelacht, als wir gehen. Nur mein Papa gewählt. Und sie sind nur gelaufen nach dem Wagen, bis ich nicht mehr nicht wollen bleiben mehr. Das Gedanke, wir sind nur gelaufen. Und wir haben mehr gesehen.
I mean, it's heartbreaking, and to think that, you know, here she is telling the story, God knows how many years later. She was a little child, and her memory of this is so strong and so moving. So you can, don't watch that, whatever the hell that is. You can explore all of those oral histories on our website, and it's incredible what you can find. And I'll also add that if you know anyone, we're still collecting these stories, and if you know anyone that we should interview, they don't have to be exactly like that. They can be stories of a neighborhood in Portland. We might not have that many interviews. Whitney, the director of the project, was just here. She did some interviews here, but if you know people that we should talk to, you let us know and we try to make that happen, because we're really trying to save these stories. So in addition to what I've described so far, we publish a magazine, Pockenträger. It's an English language magazine, which you get if you become a member. We have a podcast, The Schmooze. We have a whole range of virtual public programs that several times a month that you can watch. They're on Yiddish literature and Jewish history and more. But if you happen to be able to come to the Yiddish Book Center and make the pilgrimage, as I like to say, we've just opened a brand new permanent exhibition called Yiddish, A Global Culture. And it's global in scope, but it's very personal. It tells the extraordinary story of modern Yiddish culture through hundreds of rare objects, through family heirlooms and photographs, music and videos, and it's a rich and revelatory account that places Yiddish at the heart of the modern Jewish story, and in ways that I think really explodes stereotypes that many people have about Yiddish. Just another photo of people exploring the exhibition on our opening. There's a highlights we have a mural of what we call Yiddish land, highlighting spaces and places and events in Yiddish culture from all over the world. And we have a medicine ball that Sholem Asch brought with him when he emigrated to the United States in the 1940s. We have vintage clothes and a steamer trunk from the 1920s, used by a literary couple, Peretz Hirschbein and Esther Schumacher, when they spent a decade traveling around the world. And you can explore the recreation of the turn-of-the-century Warsaw apartment of the famous Yiddish writer I.L. Peretz, whose legendary salon was at the forefront of Yiddish modernism. And I think what we're really trying to do is show people what a rich, modern, exciting global culture this was. It's not the stereotype people have and what most people know of, funny words or some bad jokes or, it really, very deep stories to be told here and a very modern culture. So it's really exciting to be able to put that into a space where people can experience it, and we're going to be working on a virtual exhibition, so if you don't happen to make it to the Yiddish Book Center, hopefully you'll be able to enjoy it that way. And we also host lots of programs, including our fabulous Yidstock Music Festival, where we feature the newest in Yiddish music. We have, more traditional klezmer kind of things. The klezmatics tend to come every year, but we also bring all kinds of younger musicians who are doing all kinds of wonderfully new creative things with Yiddish music in ways that I don't think their foremothers could have imagined. So I'll just show you this too. This just shows you our website is just a treasure trove. And while I hope you might be inspired to come across the country and visit us in person, there's so much content on the website. There's the digital library that I mentioned, but for the majority who don't read Yiddish, there's the oral histories. There's hundreds of recorded public programs. There's articles exploring a wide range of topics. There's translations of Yiddish stories, there's Yiddish language learning materials, there's teaching guides, and there's information about all of our upcoming programs. So that's just a little taste of everything that we do. But before I take questions, I want to close by noting that many people ask me, why does this matter? I mean, I think Aaron addressed that, and maybe I'm speaking to the converted here, and you already believe and think that it does. But I really believe that understanding Yiddish language and culture expand and help us define our understanding of Jewish history and Jewish life. The questions about how to do this have been questions that the community's grappled with writ large for the last couple of generations, and I think for the most part in the United States, again, Aaron referred to this, we abandoned Yiddish language and culture in favor of, I hesitate to say this, but I'll say it was a more narrow view of Jewish life, one that centers appropriately on the Jewish religion and spiritual life, on the Holocaust, of course, and of course on Israel. But we left this whole other story out. Yiddish was trivialized and kitschified, and even those Jews educated in Jewish day schools haven't read the great Yiddish writers and know little about their own rich history. The books are much more than just dusty tomes on a shelf. They represent a great creative outpouring, 150 years of creativity, and the treasures of survivors. I was trained as a historian, so I just happen to believe that history matters. But as a Jew, I think we should all care about this. I think it's bigger than that. By not teaching and engaging a younger generation in understanding the significance of Yiddish language and culture and our own history, we're missing an important opportunity. The Jewish world is always lamenting the challenges of connecting younger Jews to their Jewish heritage, but we fail to open up the larger story of who we are and where we come from. We don't tell them about the language that 90% of the world's Jews spoke for 1,000 years, about the rich history and culture that was lived in Yiddish, about the ways Yiddish culture has informed swaths of American culture, theater, comedy, literature, and more. So culture matters, and if you don't have access to the stories, the language, and the objects, how can we really know who we are? And I say, of course, I'm talking about Ashkenazi Jews, obviously, because this is the Yiddish Book Center. I had somebody ask me, what about Ladino? And I said, well, we care about Ladino too. We should be lifting up the stories of Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews as well. These stories have been left out in many ways of the American Jewish story. It's not really the job of the Yiddish Book Center, although you mentioned Devin Nar. We've had Devin Nar at the Yiddish Book Center. He gave a weekend course on Ladino, and we've been trying to work with him and help him think about how to rescue Ladino books. But this overall, it's a rich tapestry that I think we have failed to fully engage and embrace as a community. And I think we're all the worse for our failure to bring all of this into the mainstream of Jewish life and Jewish education. So where does Jewish culture go from here? Well, as you all know, Jews are more than just a religious group, and we're more than just the tragedy of the Holocaust. And the reasons for discarding Yiddish language and culture here and in Israel are very complex, and I won't be going into that here. But there is a rich, dynamic cultural legacy to explore. And of course, this is an important world culture worthy of study and exploration beyond the Jewish community, and provides entry points for cross-cultural dialogue and connection. I think right now our mission is as important as it has ever been, because this content opens up windows into who Jews are and into greater understanding of the Jewish people. And I'll end with an anecdote that those of you who were at the screening heard me tell last night, which is we had an alum recently stand up at a talk that Erin Lansky was giving, and she stood up and said, you know, I was a fellow at the Yiddish Book Center. I studied Yiddish at the Yiddish Book Center years ago, and my sister also studied Yiddish at the Yiddish Book Center, and now we speak Yiddish so our parents won't understand us. So I like to think that we're turning the story on its head, right? I mean, I grew up in the generation where my grandparents spoke Yiddish when they didn't want me to understand them. And now we have a younger generation that's coming to this fresh and you know, speaking Yiddish so their parents won't understand. So I hope that I've given you just a little taste of everything that we're doing and trying to do at the Yiddish Book Center. I do hope you'll come and visit us and experience this for yourself. But if not, you know, we have thousands of members all over the country who have never been to the Yiddish Book Center and who still find ways to engage with us and who want to support what we're trying to do. And I hope you'll feel the same and become a member, and you'll be able to learn about everything that we're doing and so forth and so on. So I would love to take some questions. Yeah?
Who's first?
I don't know. Oh, I'm going to repeat. Tell us who you are, you know. Okay. Outwitting History. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just wondering, at this point, you were focused so much on digitalizing.
Mm-hmm.
What actually happens to the... Oh, sorry.
Yep. Yeah, I'll repeat the question. So you said that I was speaking about the digital collection, and you're wondering what happens to the physical books. Is that right?
I'm wondering how they get distributed, if they get distributed, or because
Yeah.
you obviously get many duplicates.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we're keeping everything, except we sell books, okay? So you can come to the Yiddish Book Center. We have an open repository. Amidst the exhibition, there are stacks. And much of what's in those stacks are books that we have multiple copies of that you can purchase. People also call us up or they go online. They can order a copy of a Yiddish book. If we have many copies of it, if it's not rare, we will send it to them. We've also established libraries. I think Aaron alluded in the film. We've established libraries it's now up to 600 universities and colleges, and we sent books back to Poland, if you can believe it. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I mean, here we are sending Yiddish books to Poland. Like, what? So we obviously, then we have a repository in our basement where we keep many rare books, and then we have an off-site storage facility where we store a lot of books. So we make them available, and we're preserving the rest. Okay, I think. Oops. We'll get to you.
I think.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned Yiddish dialects. Can you talk a little bit about how similar or dissimilar the various dialects are? I'm assuming they're regional.
They're regional.
The rabbi from where Central America is different from somebody in Eastern Europe. Can they speak to one another?
Yes, they can understand one another. Yes. But you know, I'm not an expert. I'm not a linguist, so I can't say too much about that. But you've probably all heard about Litvaks and Galicianers, so you know, different dialects within the East European Jewish community. Certainly different dialects. Many of the people in Eastern Europe ended up in different countries, so you know, Yiddish may have evolved in Australia or in South America in different ways, but they were mutually understandable.
So that regionally, it'd be kind of like a northerner in the United States speaking to somebody from the Carolinas or something.
Yeah, accent, but probably also differences in words. I don't know, Perry, maybe you know a little bit about this.
There were 5 dialects in the area that we refer to as the Pale.
Right.
And basically 2 northern and then 3 to the southern and southeastern.
5 dialects in the Pale of settlement, 2 northern and 3 eastern. I'm just repeating this for the people out there in the world.
But your analogy is a very, very good one. It'd be like a Yankee talking to somebody from
Yeah.
They make fun of each other and
Yeah.
denigrate each other, but they understand.
And there's all kinds of jokes about this in the Yiddish world, in the Jewish world.
My mother speaks a funny sort of dialect, and so this comes from Winnipeg, had a very rich Yiddish tradition, and but very separate Russian and Polish background peoples. Her accent is mixed. Our family is Litvak, but her accent didn't sound like that. I really think it's a Winnipeg Yiddish. But she didn't learn it formally. She learned it on the street.
Right, sure.
They were talking, and so it was a mix of what everybody around here was.
Which is why also, you talk about the Hasidic community. I mean, in the Yiddish world, it's often referred to as Hasidish because it sounds very different from the standard. Yivo has a standardized Yiddish, and the Hasidic Yiddish sounds very different from the standardized Yiddish. Yeah. Yep.
I just want to share this moment that I'm having, appreciating that the last speakers of Yiddish were almost entirely exterminated in the Holocaust. And here we have the language that's still alive. And it just seems extraordinary to me. And I just also want to share that my father, who was a refugee from Czechoslovakia, was very proud of the fact that there was no Yiddish in Czechoslovakia. Slavish, German-speaking.
Yeah.
And bravo, here we are. And we think about the cultural life, the Broadway composers and lyricists.
Of course.
And what has been brought to this country over the last 100 years because of Yiddish. And thank you.
Well, thank you for that reflection. I think it does very much capture. I mean, I don't know if people could hear that who are listening at home, but it was just an appreciation for basically keeping this alive. And I think, one of the things that is, we have visitors who come, and our tour guides are our fellows. These are recent college graduates. They're in their 20s, and they speak Yiddish. And visitors come, and they're like, "What the hell?" Like they cannot square this in their minds. So it's really fascinating to hear how young people are experiencing Yiddish in such a different way than my generation would have experienced it, which was something that it wouldn't have even occurred to me. But this is a moment, I mean, obviously this is a time when ethnic and cultural identity are being, held up as the standard bearers, and a lot of young people come to us because they want to understand, like, who are we, in a way that goes beyond what they might have experienced, even if they may have had a bar bat mitzvah, they may have gone to Jewish camp, but they don't know about this broader story. And for many of them, it's revelatory, and it also gives them another avenue. They may not feel at this point in their lives that connected to being part of a religious community. They may not feel that connected to Israel, but they find a way in through this culture and the language. So that's really exciting. I know there's a question there.
Not a question as much as my parents left, and I have these 45 records of Al Jolson that are in Yiddish.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what to do with them. Nobody wants to take them. Would you take them?
You know what? I can tell you who would take them. So we don't take records. There are a couple of places that do. So I can tell you where they could go. So get my card before you leave, and I'll tell you where to send them. Mm-hmm.
I have two questions. One is, what is the oldest book that is in your Yiddish?
I don't know what the oldest book that is in our collection. I don't know. I think there's book from early 1800s might be among the oldest books we have. There wasn't a lot published in Yiddish. You know, there are some very early books published in Yiddish, but the majority were published between 1860 and the 1960s, which of course makes sense because this was secular literature and it grew out of the Enlightenment, with the Haskalah, which is the Jewish Enlightenment. And, you know, so the development of a real Yiddish literary culture didn't happen until a little later.
And then the other question is, Susan, could you tell us just a little bit about your background?
Sure. So, right. Well, I grew up in New York City on the Upper West Side with grandparents who spoke Yiddish when they didn't want me to understand. I actually am not a Yiddish speaker, partly because of that, and it wasn't my scholarly trajectory. I got a doctorate in Russian history with a field in Jewish history. I taught a lot of Jewish history, but I never learned Yiddish. I came to the Yiddish Book Center sort of in a circuitous way after working in my own field in New York, running a program working in higher ed and research on the former Soviet Union. I spent a lot of time in the Soviet Union and the early post-Soviet years. I worked in the nonprofit arts and culture and museum world, and then this job opened up 14 years ago, and it was sort of a marriage for me of my academic and personal background and my experience in the museum and nonprofit worlds. So, you know, I've studied a little bit of Yiddish on the side, and I keep wanting to take one of our classes, but I've been busy running the Yiddish Book Center, so. And it's really interesting, too, because we have, you know, when I joined the Yiddish Book Center 14 years ago, we had a staff of 21. We now have a staff of 40. And we had, at that time when I joined, I think we had, of course, Aaron speaks Yiddish. I think we had one other Yiddish speaker on the staff. We now have probably a third of the staff are Yiddish speakers, and they're, with a few exceptions, they're younger Yiddish speakers. So it's really sort of a sea change that's happening. And I didn't have the good fortune to be on the front end of that. But you know, I'll find time one of these days.
I have a question. When I was a child growing up, I learned that in Israel, when it was becoming a country and establishing itself, there was this debate: do we speak Yiddish, do we speak Hebrew, and Hebrew won. And my curiosity is, what's the reaction in Israel to sort of the revival of Yiddish? Do you have any connections with Israel about wanting access to your material?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is a revival of Yiddish in Israel as well. I mean, no one needs to worry now that whether Hebrew or Yiddish is going to be I mean, Hebrew is the language of Israel. It's the language, so it's no longer, Yiddish is no longer a threat in Israel. I think, so there's a lot more Yiddish in Israel than there was, and just as here, there are a lot of younger people studying Yiddish. There's more cultural activity in Yiddish than there used to be, and you know, as I say, we're working with the National Library to make sure they're doing a lot of book scanning, and so there's a lot more happening in Yiddish, and there's a big summer Yiddish course in Tel Aviv now. So it's a different era. I mean, yeah, I mean, no one thinks that Yiddish is going to be the language of Israel. So I think just as here in many ways, okay, now we can do it. You know, it's okay to do it now, right? I think the same thing is true there. And there's a revival of Yiddish in Poland, in France. There's a Yiddish program. There's for years there was a Yiddish program in Vilna. So it's fascinating. I mean, in many ways, it's also very poignant. The notion that there's this kind of phenomenon of interest of Jewish history and Yiddish in Poland. Well, you know, where there are hardly any Jews anymore. You know, it's kind of a very strange phenomenon. On the other hand, I mean, we've had a couple of wonderful fellows come to us for the year from Poland who are not Jewish, who are really committed to Yiddish and want to bring it back to their country and are very committed to making sure that history is represented. So, you know, you can't. History is very improbable, right? You really, it just takes these twists and turns that you could not really imagine. And the Yiddish Book Center's own story is so improbable. So, yeah.
Not even sure if this is working, but I'll hold it anyway. So Susan, you've talked a lot about the sort of the national, the international, maybe the globalization of the work that the Yiddish Book Center does. So is there an interest in the non-Jewish community? Of course, we're all aware of philo-Semitism, and you know, there are people who are so curious about things Jewish. Is this
Yes.
over into
So the
Yiddish?
question for those at home, is there an interest in the non-Jewish community? Yes. I mean, we don't actually, I mean, we run all our programs. We don't ask if anyone's Jewish. They come to us. We had, in our fellow program, I mentioned a couple of people who have come over the years from Poland, not Jews. We had a Native American who studied Yiddish. And what's interesting about some of the people who are not Jewish who are studying Yiddish is that they're seeing Yiddish as an outsider language, right? So some of the people who are interested in, we had a fellow from Ireland who spoke Irish, right? And she grew up, you know, in this community where preserving the language was so central. Well, she came to our program, learned Yiddish, and she's become, you know, one of the preeminent translators of Yiddish theater. Her name is Karen O'Brien. Fabulous actor, a director, and translator of Yiddish theater. So yes, I think what's interesting is, you know, the surprise when I talk to people sometimes and, you know, explain that there are people who are not Jewish who they say, why would they be interested? Well, isn't that kind of a crazy question? Like, why wouldn't they be? You know, you don't ask somebody why they're studying, I don't know, you know, Chinese. You know, why should it be such a strange thing that somebody who isn't Jewish is studying Yiddish? But it remains not that common. But I think more and more, especially also, we get a lot of kids who come from mixed backgrounds, which of course is, if you're not in the Haredi community, it's the future of the Jewish community, are people who come from families who, you know, they may have one parent who's Latino, they may have a parent who's Asian, and they come and they have a very diverse relationships to their Jewish identity and Jewish heritage. And some of them know almost nothing about Jewish history or Jewish culture, and they come to us because they want to figure out who they are. And so it's you know, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see where this goes in the next decade or two.
There is some Yiddish going on in Portland. Last fall, I took a course from PSU in literate Yiddish culture. Now, I was hoping it would be language as well, but it wasn't. It was Yiddish culture. But it's taught by a Jewish man at PSU who could teach Yiddish, and maybe he will. I hope so.
Maybe so. I mean, there is a real flowering of Yiddish language teaching at colleges and universities around the country. I mean, when I was in grad school, in the late 1980s, there was almost no Yiddish taught at major universities, and now it is at most of the major universities. I mean, Harvard, Yale, University of Texas, Indiana, Michigan, you know, Berkeley, most of the major colleges and universities are teaching Yiddish now. So there are lots of opportunities to learn it. We're actually, I'm hoping, going to have a partnership with University of Texas. They hired a graduate of our Yiddish pedagogy program, somebody who trained to teach Yiddish through us. She was hired at University of Texas, and she wants to do an online college Yiddish course for all the colleges where it's not taught. So we can offer a 4-credit Yiddish class. So it's really, it's going to be interesting to see how many more people engage with this. So are we running out? Do we have time for one more question? Mm-hmm. Is there one more question? Okay. Oh, yeah.
I was thinking about the popularity of TV shows like Shtisel.
Oh, sure.
And if that's helped to raise the consciousness.
I think, yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
But then also, just thinking about the art and the theater, what is being done to preserve the Yiddish theater?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think there's a lot more of that going on. I mean, you know, most of you probably heard about the production of Yiddish Fiddler on the Roof, which was on Broadway and actually has toured. There's the National Yiddish Theater Folksbiene based in New York, which does a lot of Yiddish theater. But there's more. There's a lot more going on. I mean, there was a theater company in New York that wasn't a Jewish theater company that did a series of Yiddish plays in translation. We're translating more of the plays so that they can be produced. So that there's that, and music, there are a lot of people that are really active in the music world. I mean, our Yidstock Music Festival is just one way of trying to give a voice to all of these people who are trying to bring this music out into the world, but we're not the only ones, and these festivals have grown in popularity. I think there's a lot of potential, actually, as we go into the next generation, because the younger generation, they're interested in creating new things out of the old, and they want to build on the tradition, and there's a lot of great creativity going on. There's a lot of Yiddish zines. You know, they're doing these really creative graphic novels and little zines. We have some of those in our exhibition. One of our fellows was, during the pandemic, she was a statistics student at the University of Chicago. She's half Filipino and half Jewish, and during the pandemic she decided she wanted to learn Yiddish, and she became a Yiddish TikTok sensation. I'm not kidding you, she had thousands of followers, and she kept doing all these Yiddish memes, and I mean, really amazing. So, you know, you cannot, it's hard to foresee exactly how this evolves, but I'm optimistic. We're an optimistic organization. I don't think we would exist if we weren't optimistic, and you know, we continue to be inspired by the young people who come to us, and by the older people who entrust us with their treasures and who have supported us all these years. So I hope you'll join us. And my last slide is find me at the Yiddish Book Center, and please join, and you'll hear about everything that we're doing, and stay in touch with me and with us, and come and see us when you're out on the East Coast. And so thank you again. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, we all want to thank you. This was amazing. And I wanted to share a quick memory of your parents, who one came from a very cultured family, like we heard about, that would refuse to speak Yiddish. Very Hungarian, elegant background, but then that was the language of commonality with the your Sabra dad. And I think, Hasidic family. Yeah. But I think that's also a common story of Yiddish being the uniting language of Europe, or the world, right?
Well, right. I mean, Yiddish, this is the thing we're showcasing in this exhibition. I mean, it was everywhere. This is a diasporic culture, and you can find it in all corners of the world. And of course, you know, in the Soviet Union, there was Birobidzhan. They're still speaking Yiddish. In fact, we have oral histories from Birobidzhan where there's still Yiddish speakers. So yeah, it's really fascinating, really fascinating.
Thank you for keeping it a language of the world. Well, and just on a personal note, I did tell you before, but I'll let you know that if you want to hear some very high-level Yiddish, not the kind of Yiddish yidel, beedle, didel that we think of, but the beautiful poetry of Yiddish, like Peretz Hirschbein, some of the poets that you mentioned. The Milken Archive has very beautiful recordings, and one of them I am featured on, called The Art of Yiddish Art Songs. So please give a listen.
Wonderful. Yeah.
On the Naxos label, but it's the Milken Foundation. Thank you so much.
So I was hoping, I wanted to thank you so much, but I was hoping our cantor would mention the Yiddish art songs. Okay. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Susan.
This was such a treat. I want to mention a couple of things. There is information about the Yiddish Book Center outside on the table, information about becoming a member, and there is also a sign-up sheet. So if you would like to be part of the mailing list for the Yiddish Book Center, you can sign up here. If you're watching from home and you're interested, you can contact Susan at the Yiddish Book Center, or you can call our office, and I'm sure we'll be able to connect you with the Yiddish Book Center. I also want to mention that our next two adult education programs are focusing on Ladino and Sephardic culture. So on April 18th, it's a Thursday afternoon at 1 o'clock, We're going to have a demonstration, cooking, participation just in time for Passover, so you'll learn a little bit about some of the Sephardic traditions for Passover. You'll learn a little bit in contrast with Ashkenazic. I hope I'm saying this right, Joanne. One of our organizers is right here. And then on Friday, May 31st, at our Friday evening service, is going to be an incredible treat. Our service is at 6 o'clock right here, and we've sort of titled it A Sermon in Song. We will be focusing on Ladino and Sephardic traditions in music, and we have some special guests, and it's really going to be a beautiful, beautiful service. Rabbi Joseph says, every Shabbat is special. But we love music. Okay. And also, if you've enjoyed these programs and our other programs, I'd like to invite you to donate to the Adult Education Fund so we can continue to bring special people here like Susan. So thank you all so much. It's been wonderful. I don't know what happened to the other one. The other one is somewhere in this room.
What's it? Oh, I took the other.
Oh, okay. I just turned this one off.
Great.
Yeah.
Hey.